Hey, it's Ben, and this is Drambo by BeepStreet, the modular Groovebox iOS app for iPad and iPhone. Um, this episode is going to be about all the different samplers that are modules within Drambo. So you actually have a couple. You've got like a multi-mode, crazy Flexi Sampler. It has like a scratch mode and a looper mode. And then you've got like a multi-sampler set up where you have like different samples. This is a snare kit, and it has different play modes within it. And then you have like a one-shot sampler, which is just a little bit simpler, smaller, more compact. You have a recorder module, which isn't like triggered in the same way. And then there's a couple different play modes in the sampler that allow you to do different things. So figured this sort of constituted its own video just talking about the samplers. So first we're going to look at the Flexi Sampler. So Flexi basically allows you to add one sample into the sampler, and I've got the Amen break in there right now. And to add a sample or change your sample, you just tap in to this view. If you're starting like from a blank slate, you tap in and it would bring up your sample folder view within Drambo. So most of these are like factory samples that are going to ship with Drambo. So it comes with a bunch of different percussion, like one shots. But I'm going to add in a loop that ships. You can like preview right in the, and I'm just going to add Amen. And then it's going to show up in your waveform view. So there's a couple different play modes. One shot mode, it's going to play like all the way through the sample. So you just tap and you don't have to hold down. It's going to continue playing. And you'll see there's a start slice section. So it's set to offset, and we don't have any slices. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a couple slices. If you tap in, all you have to do to add a slice is just click in the sample. And I'll add a couple in there. Now it's set to offset, which is one of the controls. This is offset. And then it's responding to pitch also. But if you go from start slice offset to like note, for instance, then you can control the slice with a note, and it's not going to respond to pitch anymore. And because it's set to one-shot mode, it's going to play all the way through the sample, even through your slices. Now, there's also gate mode. So that's going to not play all the way through. So trigger is like it gets one trigger signal and it continues to play through. Gate, it's looking for an on gate to keep playing. And normally I use trigger mode, but you can use whatever you want. So one slice mode basically just plays your slice, and then it stops when it gets to the next slice. And then you have a velocity mode for slices. So depending on how hard you hit the key, it would play a different slice, or your drum pad or whatever. And random, obviously, it's going to display random slices. So that's fun. Go back to note. So loop is not really going to pay attention to your slices. And if I just don't want to see those green things there, or maybe I want to move this around a little bit. To remove a slice, you just tap in. And then to move a slice, you grab and hold it and drag to a different section. And as far as I know, you can add as many slices as you want. It's not like you have 16 slices or anything like that. So let's get rid of it so we don't have to look at our slices anymore. I can't tell if that's a slice or not. Looks like it's just sort of an artifact. Okay. So in loop mode, it's not just going to continue to play through. So I'm tapping, I'm like giving a trigger, it's going to stop. So it's looking for a gate. And, you know, if I go and I put in a step in the sequence to go for a whole loop, it'll work, but it's not necessarily in sync right now. So one thing I can do, I can go to my sync options. This is a 2-bar loop. So you can set it for 8 beats or however many beats it is, up to 16. And I'm going to turn my fade out like all the way up. And then I'm going to make my pattern an 8-step pattern. So now it's going to be, it's not doing time stretch, but it's doing like a pitch stretch. And I think it doubled my thing. So it is going to fade out by the end of my loop. So now I could just turn the gate all the way on. So that's loop mode. And of course I can mess with my loop points. And because we're synced, it's going to slow down because it's stretching that portion across 8 bars or 8 beats. And I can mess with pitch, that kind of thing too. So if we go up to speed, this is really fun. Pitch is just going to go like really slow or really quick, whatever. But speed is going to go in reverse. So like 0 speed is no movement at all. It's going to be hard for me to zero that in. I might be able to think we're there. But speed is actually going to go into reverse. So one thing, I'm going to try this real quick. Some of these are modulatable, like speed and offset and pitch. So I'm going to use like an envelope. And I'm going to throw in a trigger so that, you know, my sample is still going to be triggered by the sequencer. But the envelope that I'm going to use to modulate is not going to be triggered by the sequencer. It's going to be triggered by my trigger button. So I just want a negative envelope. So now you can almost get like scratch effects with that speed and a pitch adjustment. So a couple other things that you can do. If we go back into the sample, I'm going to go to we'll go to loop ping-pong. That is basically if our loop was really slow, you can have like a loop. You see how now it's going to go back and forth, basically. I think this is actually offset. So the yellow is the loop point beginning, red is the loop point end, and then orange is the offset. But loop ping pong is just going to go back and forth in the loop instead of start to finish. And then scratch mode, this is maybe the most like just sort of out of nowhere one. It doesn't respond to trigger at all. It's only basically the offset becomes a playhead on a cassette, like a tape, or the needle on a record. So you have to modulate offset in some way. So one thing that I've just been having a lot of fun with, I can do like the LFO, and we're going to have to sync this to our clock. So I'm going to use the mini LFO, sync to clock. Saw is the most like similar to the time signal. We'll modulate all the way, and then we have to change our. So this is 8 beats still. And then bipolar, there is no negative time. So our saw wave is going to look. I can show you what I'm talking about. Oscilloscope. Copy that and paste it. It's basically, and it doesn't look exactly like time, but it's basically the same. So now you can start doing all sorts of crazy things. You can modulate like the speed. With triggers. So like the sample isn't actually being triggered by anything in the sequence. It's just the modulation and offset that's being triggered in that way. And speed doesn't have any control. Pitch doesn't have any control. We're not doing anything with the loop or anything like that. It's just offset in this mode, for scratch mode. Just tons of fun stuff that you can do with this. So a little bit more about like control over your sample and like looking at samples. So once you have a sample here, if you want to change the sample, you have to go to load. And it's actually it's a good sample, like viewer, sample folder organization, whatever. So, you can make a folder, let's just say like demo, and then I think I made that folder in my songs list. So these are full samples I've added. But I can go into a new folder and then I can import a sample. And it's just going to use your files app. So I can go to my audio share and I can look really quickly for some samples to sample. And I think I've already imported some of these, but it's misnamed, but it's a nice little sample. We'll take it out of scratch mode to one shot. And it's synced, so that was fun. Native is like the basic. Finally hear it. So anyways, you can zoom into the sample, like, the full, however long the sample is showing up here, but then you use your like pinch and pull gestures to zoom. So you get really fine control over this. And you can also go to edit. So like if I want to kind of set like a region in here, I'm not even going to listen to it, but we'll say I just want like this part of the sample. If you go to edit, you can trim to a loop area. And then there is a normalize function, so that'll make it like a little bit louder, or it will normalize it. But you can also go to set slices, and then you can detect transients. It's going to work pretty well. I think I'm in the wrong slice mode. And then I can still add slices. But you could also do just like set 8 slices, set 16 slices, whatever, if you had a perfect loop and you just wanted to set slices in time. And then you can also remove all slices. So that's nice. Now, there's some other cool things in here. I will set something up to sample real quick. You're going to notice it has a signal input. So you can sample into Flexi, and that's really fun. So I'm just going to clear this by going to record. And then I'm going to clear and then remove, like totally starts fresh. And then I'm going to get set up real quick. Okay, so I just set up a really quick sequence on tracks 13 and, well, they're really the first track and the second track, but they're labeled 13 and 14. So it's just an FM operator and some drums on this track, and they're going into a mixer. They're like routed into their own output, and then the mixer is being routed into track 1, which is going into the Flexi Sampler. So you have a couple different recording modes. So the first one is first you need to set your source. It's going to default to external. I'm going to send it to module input. And confirming that I'm recording. All you do is hit record. It's going to start recording. And then it's going to keep monitoring. So I have monitor turned on. If I turn it off now, it's going to play through in whatever mode I have. I can pitch it up. Go sort of just like no. Okay, so you can really easily resample. But then if we go back here, let's clear it and remove it. There's a threshold option, which is basically just going to look for a signal input before it starts recording. So I'm going to go to external and just see what that looks like. Okay, so when I started snapping, that's when it started recording. So remove that again. Go back to modular input. There's also a pattern sync. So this is going to start recording on the downbeat of a pattern. And like when you hit play, and then it'll actually wait until the beginning of a pattern. So it's sort of going to like arm itself and then start recording. And now I can hit stop, or hit record, and it'll stop on the pattern. So now I have a perfect loop, and here's where I could go and set my slices to like 16 slices, and then change my mode again to note. So this it's really powerful. I think what you're able to do with the Flexi Sampler. I think I covered almost everything in Flexi, so I'm going to go on to the next track, which has the multi-sample on it. It's called Sampler. It's just called Sampler, but this basically allows you to add multiple samples into these different zones. So again, these are just like some different snares that come with Drambo, and I'm going to start from scratch. So I'm just going to get rid of Sampler, and I'll put in a new one. So again, to add a sample, you have to go in to edit, and then there's two options. So the first thing, which is really cool, this is like your little menu over here. You can load a whole folder, and it's just going to auto load it. So if I go to load folder, I can then I can load one of the like folders that are already in here. Let's do something a little bit smaller. So all of my kicks, I can just say select current folder, and then they're going to be just automatically mapped. Now, I do not know the naming convention that Drambo uses, but it will import like a multi-sample instrument if it has the proper naming. And I don't do really anything with the like multi-sample folders, multi-sampled instruments. So I haven't used that feature, but I know that it will do it. I just don't know the naming convention that you need. But it would basically map your samples accordingly based on how they're named to the right notes, is what I'm trying to say. So that's a really cool feature. But it will also just throw in like some already chopped samples that you have, or like a drum kit, and you won't have to like mess around with that at all. But you can also, I'm just going to remove everything. You can put in your own samples on the zones. So to add a zone, you just tap in and drag, and your zone can take up like a full octave or 2 octave or whatever range of notes. And then it's also 4 zones of velocity. So you could have like 1 sample for an octave, and then you can just drag these to move them around. But you grab the corner to change the zone itself. So this would be like 1 octave range plus 1 note, I guess. But 4 zones of velocity. Or it could just be like 1 note if you wanted it to be. So if you want to remove a zone totally, you just drag it down and out. So what I've been using it for is like a load a sample and sort of like play around with. Here, now we can make this a little bit longer. It's going to be set to forward mode, and that's going to be like pitch. But you can change it to a loop mode where you get like a loop setting. So it'll loop. There's a loop ping-pong, and then there's also the chromatic slice again. So in chromatic slice, you have to set a loop point. Our sample view is kind of small, so you can hit plus, and it's going to get bigger. And then you can zoom in again. And then this is nice. So in Flexi, currently there isn't like a choke where you can hit a note and it'll stop playing. That might change in the future. But in chromatic slice, you can play a zone that has no sample and it'll stop if you're on one note of polyphony or no polyphony. But then also if you just play an area in the zone that has no slice, it won't play. So, that's really good for like hip hop. If you need like triggering samples and you want to cut off the other sample. So really easy to set up like a thing of slices here. Now say you get to this last slice and, one of two things. Maybe you want it to be pitched up a little bit. You don't have control over individual slices right now. But what I can just do is go to here and then I can add another zone. I could do the same sample or a different sample, doesn't matter. Make this bigger, set some slices. It can even be like a different play mode. So I have slices here and then chromatic triggering, like regular playing a sample here. I'll set it to slice. And now maybe I want to change the pitch. So I have a global pitch control up here. And I have a control over my attack and my sustain. You have infinite release. If you don't want to have any like degradation of your volume, you just turn release all the way up. You have volume, that kind of thing. But if you go into edit, you can change your root note by just dragging this little thing here. So you just have to do a quick like, am I going up 5 notes or an octave or whatever? Not so bad. So what note is this? Here. Think, yeah, it sounds like it's still kind of in key. It would be like down a fifth. But I love this. I think it's really cool that you can have different samples within a track. And again, there's no real limit to the slices. At some point, I think there's 127 or 128 MIDI notes. So that's going to be your limit to the number of slices times 4 because you have your velocity zones. Which I haven't played with that much, but it's there if you need it. So, yeah, that's it. Anyways, you have to create a zone and then load sample on that zone to get something in there to play with. So next we have the shot sampler, and that's over on this track. I don't have anything in there. So you would go to load, and you can plug in whatever sample you want. It's just a kick. You're going to notice there's no pitch input. So by default, it doesn't get pitched up when you play with it. You can tune it, of course. And you could still do key tracking if you wanted to. Get out of here. Little thing. So you can still do key tracking on it if you want to, but it doesn't have a pitch input. It only has a gate or trigger input. And we can we'll just remove it. And then offset is basically just like the sample start. Now I'm going to go into the sample view to load a bigger sample in there. Like I'll throw in another song. So I like chopping up samples and playing with them. There, so it stopped there. Now you can still put slices in here, but there's no control over them. So what I think shot sampler might be meant to do is basically you can throw in one file that has a bunch of different shots on it, or chops, whatever, and then you can set those slices. You can set slices in here, so then it's just totally random triggering. So especially for percussive samples, you could have 6 or 7 or however many in one file, and then it would just be triggering them randomly. So that's the shot sampler. And then last is the recorder. I'm going to get this set up too. Okay, so you'll notice I'm now in AUM or OM. I'm using the AUV3, whatever this is called, plugin. But I've got the recorder set up now with audio input, and I'm using this in the audio effects slot. But I'm going to be using it to control another app, Lagrange by Iceworks. So you can have Drambo in the like an audio unit spot and still send MIDI out, and you can actually sequence the track that you're getting audio input from. So the rest of the setup that I have, I've got a MIDI output on this track, and this is going to be my sequencer track. And I'm going to turn this to always receive MIDI so that I can jump over here and still play. And then I have the recorder set up after an audio input, and the audio input is going to be like whatever coming into the app, which is the audio from Lagrange that I'm controlling with Drambo. So cool. So this, it basically just allows you to do simple recording. And I can, if I hit record, it'll stop. So there's no even like, there isn't like a sample viewer. You can't load a sample into here or anything like that. But then you can play it back. And you'll notice there's no like gate even. So you can't trigger this in the same way. What you would have to do is lay down P-locks and say play, play, play. And I don't have a specific use for this in mind, but it could be just kind of useful if you wanted to capture some ambient audio and then play it back every so often. Or maybe there's like more plans for the recorder module. I don't know. But what I do know is that you can also P-lock the recording. So I'm going to just lay down, on this step, it's going to start recording. So I can still use it to like play things in time. Turn the, metronome's on. And then it's going to stop recording when it gets to that step again. So it's going to be a perfect loop. And now I can say, just get rid of that and play there. Turn off that metronome. So it's just another option that you have. You can record whatever you want into there. You could record like a control voltage signal if you wanted to, and then you can control other modules with that. So this does have a lot of functionality, actually. I never even realized that. And you could be like sequencing other things with a sequencer and then just trigger something to happen with the recorder outside of your steps. So it definitely has its uses. Okay, so I think that's really all for now. That's like the basics of the different samplers in here. Again, you get like a powerful multi-mode sampler. You get like a multi-sampler where you can have different samples. And then you have like a sort of a small, more limited use recorder and shot sampler. And they come with presets in there. Again, there's like a ton of like drum kits that come, or like one shots, and then there's a couple sampled instruments that will be presets here. But the real fun is when you start using your own samples or resampling yourself, that kind of thing. Anyways, have fun.